the intersection of technology and creativity. So I'm always trying to understand ways in which technology can help the world become better, especially Africa. I'm very passionate about changing the landscape of Africa. More than anything else, though, I think I really like to teach concepts. I really like to explain how things work, mostly because it helps me understand how things work. So yeah, that's me. That's a little bit about my childhood.
Wow. You know, you grew up, you were born in Gulu, lived in Lugazi for a while on the sugar plantation. So tell us how someone from Gulu who lived in Lugazi came to fall in love with robotics and all this science nerd stuff. Yes. Lived in Lugazi for a while on the sugar plantation. So tell us how someone from Gulu who lived in Lugazi came to fall in love with robotics and all this science nerd stuff.
Surprisingly,
Yes.
a lot of it has to do with the environment in which I grew up in. So first of all, I like to consume media. So even as a child, I think my biggest influence for robotics were two things. One, when I was growing up in the 90s, there was a TV show called DuckTales. Some older people who are listening to this might remember. And there was a scientist called Sir Gyro DeJones, and he liked making things. And one of the things that he used to like making a lot was robots. But I think two definitive moments for me for robotics were basically two movies. The first was a movie called The Black Hole, which is a really old movie that I watched in my childhood. And then there was another called Short Circuit, which is basically a movie about a robot that comes to life. And a lot of my robots that I used to build when I was young centered around the type of robots in Short Circuit. It was a robot called Johnny 5. And I just liked it because it was really cool, really exciting. Really cool, really funny. And it was like trying to help people. So my entire childhood has always been around the world of science, like whether I'm picking up things from TV or reading it in a book. I grew up in an era where there was no internet, and so the only way that you pick information was to actually find a book and read from that book. So a lot of my knowledge came from trial and error, and most of it was basically from books. So getting obsessed with robotics was purely about the media that I consumed when I was young. It was a lot of science fiction. It was a lot of cartoons, and most of it was based. There were a lot of robots because I think in that period, robotics was still sort of new, sort of like what AI is now. Robotics was sort of new and exciting, and so a lot of media had lots of stories about robots. So yeah, that's how I transitioned into the exciting world of robotics.
From TV. So we can say you're self-made.
No, I am absolutely not self-made. I am mostly self-taught. My learning journey, my education, my schooling, let me use the word schooling. My schooling ended in my first semester of university. So my academic qualifications are a high school certificate, an A-level certificate. But so I have taught myself a lot of things. And most of it is because of the power of the internet. So even as a child, yes, I used to spend a lot of time reading things on my own, watching things just to understand them better. In fact, the story of Fundibots is the story of a teenager that got excited by something in a school lab when I was reading it, and then, the circumstances around that forced me to think about something like Fundibots. So there is a lot of self-learning. Self-made? No, absolutely not. There are so many people who have blessed supporting me financially, advising me, guiding me, and in my path by the universe, God, whatever you choose to call it, but for being placed in my path by God to guide, those inflection points in your life where you meet someone and that path. So I absolutely cannot say I'm self-made, but I am mostly self-taught, especially after secondary school.
All right, sounds good. I think everyone has had not self-made, but self-taught. So I'm just going to pause for a minute there and remind everyone who is tuned in that we are live on Smart24 TV and YouTube, on their YouTube channel as well. So in case you can't catch us on the Twitter space, you can also catch us on Smart24 TV. And so, Solomon, there is a game that we play on our Twitter spaces called 2 Lies and 1 Truth. So basically, you have to tell us 2 things about you. 2 lies, 1 truth, yes. So it's up to the audience to guess what is the lie.
2 lies, 1 truth.
2 lies,
wow.
1 truth, yes.
Let's give you a minute to think. Okay, so 3 things. 1, I know how to mingle posho. 2, I have been arrested for stealing sugarcane. And 3, I have I have published a book. Yes.
All right.
1, I know how to mingle posho. 2, I have been arrested for stealing sugarcane. And 3, I have published a book.
About Mr. Solomon. 1, he can mingle posho. 2, he was arrested for stealing sugarcane. Or 3, he has published a book. We're going to have a poll out. You can just let us know your answers and what you think. We shall reveal the answer at the end of the interview. Yes, so going back to what we were talking about, what we're all here for is the story of Fundibots. We want to know, how did you think of it? How did you come up with this idea? How was Fundibots born, basically? Is the story of Fundibots. How did you think of it? How did you come up with this idea? How was Fundibots born, basically?
Okay. So the story of Fundibots, like I mentioned, is basically the story of an little African boy growing up. And again, this is one of those things where I say, you have inflection points in your life where things happen to you that don't make sense at that moment. But in hindsight, it's almost like, the things where
Yes, now we can hear you. Sorry, you went off there. at the very early start. Yes. Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, now we can hear you. Sorry, you went off there
All right, no worries.
at the very early start. Yes,
Okay.
yes,
So I was basically saying that I grew up in a time when there was not much by way of entertainment or information. TV would start at 6 p.m. and close at 10. So all you had was those 4 hours, and in those 4 hours, it was a wide variety of content. But thankfully, we used to play outside a lot. And I grew up with my cousins in Bogolowe Flats, and if you ask any of them now, they tell you that I was the kid that was always in the big rubbish dumpsters looking for old electronics because I was like, how does this thing work? How do radios work? How do TVs work? This is when I was actually like, I think 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old. I was trying to figure out.
hold on. Yes. Okay, now, yes, yes, we can. Yes. Hello, we seem to have lost you.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, now,
Can you hear me now?
yes, yes, we can.
Okay. All right. So I built my first robot when I was in primary 4, I think. And I also tried building a helicopter around the same time. I mean, I built the structure of the helicopter. And these gadgets were functional in that, yes, the helicopter rotated. Yes, the robot pretended to walk, but it never really did anything. I was also the kid that would, those of you who remember wire cards, I was the kid whose wire cards were not being steered by a stick, but actually had like batteries and motors. So this was a time when and the biggest frustration for me in that time was that school was not the same. School was basically a place where you got to memorize in information. And so my primary education was basically about for resources to help me. And I only found that in libraries. I only found that in TV, or like using my transport money to buy magazines that I found on the roadside near the taxi park. So when I went to secondary school, I was very excited about secondary school because in my mind I had heard about science labs, chemistry, physics, biology, all these practical sciences, and I was really excited by it. But when I got to school again, I realized it was just the same as primary school, except that, this time you had labs, but you still had to memorize information. The entire purpose of school, from what I could fathom, was to pass an examination, which was not how learning worked for me. So that the inflection point for Fundibots came because I discovered a book in the science in the library. And I was those kids who was always in the darkest corners of the library reading really old books, really tired books, really well-preserved books because no one else was reading them. Everyone was on textbooks. So I found a book called The Engineer in Wonderland by Eric Lathwaite, and he was a British scientist. And one of the things that he used to do was to give lectures to children. And he taught science in a way that was really approachable by young children. And he was very passionate about the education.
Smart24, driving business.